A book that I sold actually blew up on TikTok in 2021, which is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is now sold like over 5.5 million copies and been translated into 40 languages. The idea of the overnight success, right? It's like these people write books for years and years and years, right? And it's like we never know in the book business what is going to be the book that's going to connect with people or, totally send somebody to the stratosphere. Like we just don't know. And that's kind of the fun and the alchemy of the business.
They may have told you to go to the big city, chase the busy crowds, find the bright lights, but no, you chose your own path to stay right here. I'm your host, Claire Bouvier. Welcome to the Small Town Entrepreneur Podcast, where opportunity is just on the other side of the door. Today, we're thrilled to have Carly Waters on the show. This woman is a standout innovator in the literary world. Carly has been a guiding force for authors, navigating book deals, and advocating for their incredible successes. So let's jump in. Join us for the conversation with Carly, whose dedication and insights are inspiring an entire new generation of writers and readers. All right, welcome to the show, Carly. Who's Carly? Introduce us to the audience.
Hello, everybody. My name is Carly Waters. I have worked in book publishing since 2009, and it's just the best business. I love working with authors. I love working with creatives. I love seeing where the written word is taking us. And obviously that will build on our conversation we're having today. And my job is to be a literary agent. And so that means I am an author's advocate. Authors hire me to help negotiate their book deals. And basically I'm like a talent manager, a talent agent, if you kind of want to think of it in Hollywood speak. But I'm helping them manage their career, everything from helping them with the manuscripts to negotiating the book deals to sitting in on marketing and publicity meetings. And it's pretty much the best job. I love it.
And you work for yourself, which, I mean, you're saying, yes, you work with a lot of people. Would you say you work for yourself in this industry?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So the way that literary agencies work and function, and I can't say all of them, but most of them, is that individual agents work at a larger agency. So there's an agency that I work for. It's PS Literary Agency based in Toronto in the GTA. And I have been with them since 2010. But the way that the industry functions is that most of us are independent contractors, which makes me self-employed. And so that's kind of the interesting piece of it. So I also do lots of teaching. I teach writers all about the business of publishing and how to get published. And I also am a co-host of a podcast called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, which we've incorporated into a business. So I basically have 3 businesses going on right now.
So you're pretty bored.
Yeah.
Every day is, pretty bored. Okay. I'm going to just say it out loud because I think when people hear, well, first of all, my background, I have an English literature degree, right? So people are like, oh, and what will you do with that other than teach? And it's funny because here we are now. That was a common question before the rise of, with tech, with artificial intelligence. And we've talked a lot about how much is changing. But the question I really want to kick off, aren't you worried about the future of books and writing when I can just close my eyes and tell a computer to write me a blog post on how to start a podcast and it might write it better than me?
Yeah, it's an amazing question and something I've been thinking about a lot this week, just this week and this month, in 2024, we've heard so much about tech layoffs and media layoffs. And there's just constantly this rotation in the content creation world of what's new, what's better, how fast can I read this? How fast can I consume this? And yet the book business is a multi-billion-dollar business that has been around since the invention of the Gutenberg printing press, and it returns profits every year, And so while a lot of people like to think that tech's coming for us or everybody's spending their leisure time on TikTok or Netflix or, any other ways that they want to spend their leisure time, the book business is still booming. And I think when every kind of new generation comes along, we're always like, oh no, is this new generation going to like books? And then something like, Book Talk blows up, which is on TikTok. There's this huge book community. And in 2021, they grew the market by $20 million by growing the pie of the book business by all these Gen Zs on TikTok growing the actual pie of the book business. And so I just like laugh because I'm like, it is just a throwaway comment, of course. But like when you get into the economics of the book business and you're like, people actually do want to, read long form content. And how do you think all those shows end up on Netflix? They're adapted from books. That's where they come from.
Thank you, Shakespeare. Well, I can say I'm part of 2 book clubs still to this day, because I think it's more than books. It's community, it's storytelling, it connects us. Are you noticing though it's harder to get published because of the noise, because there's such a high level of publishing that could happen? And when I say publishing, content writing, it's on steroids because we can get so much more out there now.
Yeah. No, I think it is a good question. I think about that in 2 buckets, which is fiction versus nonfiction, right? Because with fiction, a novel is a novel. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It's approximately 80,000 words. People who read novels gravitate towards novels. There's book clubs for a reason. There's that piece, which is the entertainment piece, right? We turn to books to entertain us, mostly on the fiction side. On the nonfiction side is where I think there's a bit more of a question mark, which kind of gets what you're saying about like, there's just so many blog posts and podcasts and everything that we can listen to fill that need in us in terms of seeking information or guidance or self-help. There's a lot of things that can fill that need. And so I think in the nonfiction space, I think about this a lot more. Nonfiction meaning, business books or pop science, pop psychology, health, anything in that space. That's what I have a big question mark around, is because I always ask clients or potential clients, why does this need to be a book? Why can't this be a blog? Why can't this be a podcast series? Why does it need to be a book? And there's a reason that things become books. And the publishing industry loves to rely on individuals in the nonfiction space with really big platforms because they know that, hey, so-and-so has an email subscriber list of 2 million. Yeah, let's get them a book deal. And then they can send it through their email funnel and, move lots of copies. Publishing really likes that, right? Because that takes some of the stress off of them. And they know that they can kind of partner with these authors with large platforms. The harder piece is nonfiction authors with no platform. And they can really be wanting to write a really great book. I cannot sell something from somebody who doesn't really, on the nonfiction side, again, they don't want any novelists coming for me. But on the nonfiction side, I really can't sell books from people that don't have like at least 10,000 followers, 20,000 followers, 30,000 followers, because publishers are going to want that social proof. They need to know that social currency, that like what you're writing about, what you're blogging about, what you're TikToking about has an audience, and that audience will ideally want to pay for it. And because books these days cost about $30.
Yeah. And I think, and that's the thing is in the marketing world, and I know this is your world as well, in any world that we're selling something, it's the distribution that comes with it. And I think for listeners that, I love the question, why does it have to be a book? And I think there's lots of mediums out there that people digest based on personality, time restraints, interests. I'm a Medium girl. I love Medium because it says in 2 minutes, I'll be done this article. And I'm like, I can squeeze that in. And I'm not trying to go through the pages. But for writers and for people that are hoping maybe to go along this path, and we see the disruption in tech, and I always come back to this because I'm wondering, what advice can we give to these writers, these artists, to really hone in? What are the important things that they should be honing in during this time? What's the gap?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think there's kind of 2 pieces that I think about right now, which is really great writers are going to be needed more than ever for a couple of reasons. Number 1 is the storytelling. Right? Because if you think about what makes a good TikTok, what makes a good reel, what makes a good YouTube, what makes a good Substack, like whatever you're consuming in terms of, as you're talking about like all these medium we can consume, it's all about the storytelling. It's like the delivery of the method. Like we're going to need so many writers to be writing scripts for all these podcast series. And there is going to be an influx of content because it's easier than ever to make content. But we need human beings to help craft the storytelling piece of it. And that is where I think, again, there's a huge opportunity there. And then also, in terms of like the AI piece, right? Like we know that there is going to be lots of devices and software out there that can presumably, quote unquote, do the job of humans, but humans know when they're not talking to other humans. And I know that the technology, even by the time this episode comes out, is constantly evolving, and we're going to date ourselves quickly, right? By trying to...
We are real though, just for the listeners. This is Carly, this is Claire, and we are in real human form today.
Today. Yeah. So that piece is really interesting to me to think about, like the humans that are going to be needed on the ground to be doing these jobs. And I was reading, I have a subscription to New York Times. So I read the paper. I have a Sunday subscription. So I get like the big issue every Sunday. And I was reading an article about AI in the health space and how every hospital of every major network is hiring an AI specialist to help, pull all of this information and data and software together. But who do you think is going to have to write these reports and, create the content that has to be fed into these machines? It's like that's human beings that are going to have to do all this writing. So I actually think because of the amount of content that is going to be able to be consumed, the need for writers, not just for books, but also just really great writers, is really going to be huge, huge value.
Which is such an optimistic, exciting thing to think about, because I think it's so natural to go into a fear-based thinking when something new is coming. So as soon as something, we talk about this new internet, right? Web3, everyone, the blockchain, we're thinking, oh my gosh, it's so fearful. It's whether it's ethical implications or it's going to take away jobs. It's really interesting. You're saying, with the so much more content, we're going to require more talent to actually go through and be packaging or, creating the content. What are some of the biggest dangers then that you see in the publishing? Like, where do you think it's like the dangers, but also where do you think it's going to evolve to?
Yeah, I mean, for us, the big thing is copyright law and legislation.
Yeah.
Like, as you know, like we're just not even close to having copyright law catch up with where it needs to be. And so in book publishing, it's all about copyright law, right? The word publish means to make public, right? And that the idea is that, what I sell in terms of book deals is licensing deals, right? So it's like it's all copyright law. And we're just not there in terms of the legislation and the guardrails in order to protect authors from any eventuality.
Right.
So what I think about is a couple things as a literary agent who is protecting authors and future authors. I think about, number one, what are we licensing to this publisher, to this multi-million-dollar, if not billion-dollar, business and in this industry? What are they going to do with your content? And we want to have guardrails when we're licensing content to large media companies about what can you do with this. And so that is something I'm always thinking about. Are you using this to build language learning models? Are you selling this to Google to build their next, AI platform? Those are the things that I worry about, the eventualities of what's happening with this content and not having parameters in place in legislation to lean on copyright protections to get into these author contracts. I worry about that.
DIY website that's just duct taped together with different plugins isn't a business. It's a desperate, clunky hobby. Customers can smell it a mile away. Shopify costs money, but it makes you more. I used it for my product-based business, and the service was exceptional. It's the foundation for a real business. It's beautiful, easy to use, and designed to sell. And for just $1 for this month, you can try it out and see if it works for you. Click the show notes or go to clairebouvier.com/tools. It's interesting preparing for this episode. I was like, I'm going to have some fun and see what Carly thinks. So Claude is a long form AI. You can put in a book and you can get it summarized. So I used a whole bunch of different Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, and a couple other platforms. What I did was I took essentially 3 books that I liked. I took Atomic Habits, James Clear. I took Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert, and I forget the third one. It was an ADHD. I think I actually have it. Oh yeah, it's the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy for Adult ADHD. So funny, I actually had it right here. But I was like, okay, let's see if I can. It's kind of like making the perfect boyfriend. You're like, if I could combine all of my exes or whatever, like all these people and put into one to be perfect. And then I thought, you know what? I wonder if I can do this with a book. Let's take James Clear, Atomic Habits, Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic, and then approach Mary Salanto, the author of this book, from her approach and rewrite a blog post or something, just an article, something that's specifically on a topic to help with productivity with the lens of having the persona and the gentleness of Elizabeth Gilbert, but the atomic habit thinking and productivity hacks with the lens of an ADHDer. It was really good. What are your thoughts on that? Because as we're moving what starts to happen when you start to take, if I can do that, and obviously I didn't publish it, didn't go anywhere. I was curious for this episode. I was
Mhm.
playing around. I thought, okay, let's see what this looks like. Are you worried about this happening where, oh, and throw in a fourth lens? I want the storytelling to be told in Pixar style.
Mm.
And then it did that. Whereas
Mhm.
there's so many layers of prompting, we call it,
Yeah.
or descriptions that we're going to get so good at this. How are we going to be able to tell it is truly the author's writing?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that is where the legislation, the copyright law is going, right? Because they're going to say, are you allowed to copyright it because you're the one that made those prompts and nobody else could have chosen those 7 prompts and you're copywriting the way that you prompted it to get the outcome that you wanted? Like, that's kind of where the thinking is right now. Again, we're still
That,
far away from being there, but
yes,
the idea is going to be, how can you say that it's yours, and how are we going to adapt for this future of deciding like who owns what, and at what point does it become yours in the tinkering?
I agree. And that's the thing. That's where I don't think we're going to solve it in this episode, but it is something that when you're working with clients and when you're talking to other people in the industry,
Mm,
what are the precautions that you do suggest? What if I got some ideas by typing into Gemini or ChatGPT and it shot out some ideas for my book, how do you suggest them to be using it as a co-pilot or a
yeah.
second brain? What are the
Yeah.
ideas
So at
along?
this point, the way that publishing contracts work is that you have to sign within the larger contract a warranties and indemnities clause that says you are the creator of that work. And so
Right.
if you go back a question and if we can't answer that you own that, then you actually can't sign that publishing contract.
Right.
So you'd be hamstringing yourself to be using any of those co-pilots to create your work, because in the eventuality that you get this book deal and somebody wants to buy your book, like how incredible is that? And then it turns out, oh, I actually can't even sign this book deal because I can't prove that this is mine. So I actually, our agency and my standpoint is, do not be using any co-pilots to creatively create your work and your ideas, because you can't prove and you can't say that that is yours if you're using co-pilot. So that's the position right now, because if you want a book deal, you want somebody to pay you for your ideas, you have to prove that those are yours.
Have we seen in the industry, have you actually seen that it's been flagged that someone has, AI generated content that was pushed through? Again, it comes down to the honor system, but we recognize that it's the noise is getting so much more that how do you regulate it even at this level?
It's hard because it's basically like a self opt-in, right? You know what I'm trying to say? Like, there's no larger body in
No.
the trade publishing, right? That's doing scholarly vetting like there would be for other, such as like academic presses, right? Or something where it's like an academic paper. There are no fact checkers. Most big nonfiction authors are actually hiring their own fact checkers. And that's why I think maybe like 10 years ago, there hasn't been as much lately. I haven't heard any big cases at least, but there was some authors getting in trouble for plagiarizing themselves, right? Because they was like, oh, they write it here and then they put it here. And I forget, there was an author who got in trouble because they were just kept plagiarizing themselves. And so that, like, we saw a lot of that in the past. The thing is, as I said, like, it's a self opt-in, meaning you have to say that this is your work, and we're all adults here. The repercussion is legal repercussions, right? Like, you have to forfeit your advance and your book gets canceled. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, we have to be
Yeah.
adults here.
And I agree. And I think that it comes down to the onus, and eventually there will be certain filters that will go through that will recognize it. What are some of the skills that you really encourage? So it's interesting because what I like, and I love marketing. Marketing is so powerful. This is like such a big part of it. The storytelling is what gets you noticed. The distribution is essentially gets you pushed through and, have the opportunity. Let's say someone's listening and, immediately they're thinking, okay, my dream is to create something, to write something, and they're listening to you and they're so inspired. But then immediately, I don't want to paint all writers with a brush, but a lot of them is like, I don't want social media. I don't want to have
Yeah.
this huge channel. I want to write a story. They are of a temperament that's not looking to be on this. So there's that almost that juxtaposition of like, okay, you have to have this big distribution channel, but you just want to write and tell stories and great stories to inspire people. So what do you tell them?
Yeah, I mean, that's the biggest question of my career, honestly, right? Like, because a lot of authors do have this idea of like how they imagine their career to go. And it's very much that like storied author and their like brown leather chair, reading their books, drinking their like scotch, like that. It
Yep.
honestly, not everybody has that vision, but like that dream of, I think a lot of people have the dream of being a financially independent creative, really, like across the board, right? And with writers, it's like this idea that they can be financially free just by writing books, right? That's the dream. They just want to be a career writer. But in today's day and age, we know that in order to be a career author, you have to be teaching or creating content or also being an influencer or having a paid Substack, right? Like that's how you build a career. And this is why authors have to become more entrepreneurial than ever, right? Like
Yeah.
there's the term, you can add preneur to anything, right? But like authorpreneur, right? Where it's like you
Yeah.
have to be thinking about how you're going to kind of monetize these other buckets or get another job, right? With any creative, there's always that ebb and flow and really cyclical nature of like cash flow and income. And
Yeah.
with books, it's like you're only as good as your last book in terms of like the pay that you're getting in terms of the royalty statements and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I've always been very pro get out there, promote your work. This book has your name on it. You're the one that, has the most to gain and the most to lose by its success. And so I'm very pro get out there and talk about your work.
Yeah. You have to know, is this a lifestyle thing? You just want to say that you wrote a book, or do you want this to be a career? How often do you see in the industry now that someone writes a book that, the J.K. Rowling story? How many, J.K. Rowling being the author of one of my favorite book series is Harry Potter?
If you haven't heard of it,
I'm going to try not to get into too much Quidditch matching here. But how many stories of that, overnight? Well, that's huge, July, the 10-year overnight success,
yeah.
but of the distribution and, all the attention coming after the creation of the book. Or do you see that anymore?
Yeah, I mean, it's always kind of on slightly different scales, but the book talk kind of I was talking about and the kind of 20, I think it was about 2021, kind of second year of the pandemic when book talk really blew up. And they were totally taking books that were what we call backlist, meaning front
Yeah.
list, meaning the books that came out this year, backlist, meaning books from previous years, so taking like really celebrating these backlist titles, so books that aren't fresh and celebrating them and putting them back on the New York Times bestseller list, meaning they're selling tens of thousands of copies, right? And so
Wow.
there totally are, like Colleen Hoover was an example where, she self-published at first and,
Did
obviously
you
had a
really?
moderate amount of success. Yeah. And then she got picked up by a big five, what we call the big five publishers, one of the largest ones, Simon and Schuster, started publishing her. And then she blew up on Book Talk, which is again the book world of TikTok. A book that I sold actually blew up on TikTok in 2021, which is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which is now sold like over 5.5 million copies and been translated into 40 languages. So, that's like
Okay.
the
Huge
idea of the overnight
celebration.
the idea of the overnight success, right? It's like these people write books for years and years and years, right? And it's like we never know in the book business what is going to be the book that's going to connect with people or, totally send somebody to the stratosphere. Like we just don't know. And that's kind of the fun and the alchemy of the business.
And what's interesting when you're saying that, immediately, of course, my ADHD brain jumps to, I remember when, and it's still going on, but you could sign up to move to Mars. You could
Yeah.
leave. Well, the Mars bars chocolate bar skyrocketed
Yeah.
in that year. And I find those things really cool. And it's kind of that, that bringing back, the backlist is this idea is that this is actually really cool because we now have a platform that kind of brings back old music, old books, things
Yeah.
that are great that are bringing. So that's a really, really cool thing. That I love the optimism that you approach with this because, I come in thinking, oh my gosh, Carly, aren't you freaking out with what's happening in this world but when you look closer and someone on the outside, I'm super naive and you just kind of see the high level and the talk and the fear-based thinking is sometimes we don't know what is really happening in the publishing world. And you hear that. We're going to switch lenses a bit because like you said, before we end the episode, I want to talk a little bit about your podcast. You are the host of a podcast that has now really taken off. Can you tell us a little bit about the listeners so they can follow and learn from you as you're growing? Well, it's growing really fast, but I want to hear more
Yeah.
about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So our podcast is called The Shit No One Tells You About Writing The author, Bianca Murray, started it in 2020. And then later on in 2020, she was like, I think I need some co-hosts, some more industry perspective, because she was hosting a lot of author interviews. And then she had me on the show as a guest to talk about the publishing industry. And then from there, I joined as a co-host, and there's another literary agent who is our co-host as well. So there's the three of us. So it's Cece, Lyra, Bianca Murray, and myself, Carly Waters. And basically what we do in the front half of the episode is people voluntarily send in their query letters, which is essentially their cover letter trying to get their book published. So we critique their query letters and their first 5 pages. And so we have done this every week for 3 years. There's hundreds of hours of back content, but basically giving people advice on like how best to pitch their book and really how to make sure their first 5 pages are as strong as possible. Yeah. And so our podcast, we hit 3 million downloads this month. Actually, we just recorded our celebratory episode, and we have a Substack where we share extra advice from authors. And we also do bonus Q&As and, some bonus video for all of our subscribers. So you can find us over on Substack as well. So yeah, it's just really fun. I felt like I've always, as a literary agent, one of my job in the business is one of privilege and power, right? Because I get to kind of select who I work with and help them get book deals. And so I've always really just wanted to give back and really just help empower authors through information and education to make sure that they can make the best decisions for them as business people and just make sure that they're setting themselves up for success. So we also teach a course once a year called like our deep dive workshop, and it's a 10-week course. So we're actually just finishing up this year's course. So yeah, we have a really awesome community, and everybody lets us know like when they get an agent or they get a book deal, and it's just a really fun, vibrant community. So you can follow us on Instagram as well. Yeah, so that's our show.
Carly, it's awesome that the platform and the style. So anyone that's hoping, and this is a conversation I have a lot with people, how do you start a podcast? The most powerful style, and I absolutely love this, is showing credibility. You live and breathe it quietly, sitting, going through manuscripts and no one knows the genius and the work and all the things that are coming behind. So I think it's so powerful that in real time, people are getting to see that. And that is such a powerful and inspiring way to build an audience. So that's awesome, because that is probably one of the hardest things, because you can't just like make it up as you go. You're really doing the work and you're changing people's lives. So that's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. Thank you. We love it too.
Yeah. Thanks, Carly, so much for coming join us. I know you're super busy. Just to end the episode, is there one piece of advice for anyone that's aspiring to be in the storytelling space? One day it might be publishing a book, but what are some of the things that they can do today to start building, their muscles of, creativity, storytelling, so that eventually, if it's a book, if it's a podcast series, whatever it is, you said more than ever, we're going to need great storytellers. So what could this individual start doing today?
Yeah, I mean, the most classic example that we always tell writers is just get your butt in your chair, right? It's like nobody has more to gain from this than you. And if you want it bad enough, it's like you just got to put in the work, But other than that, other than just obviously making time and carving out time and making sure you actually do it, is really, I think the advice that I always come back to, which there's a film director, Ava DuVernay, and this quote that she has is always, when you're in your lane, there's no traffic. And I always come back to this quote because I think it's can be used in so many contexts, but I always think with creatives, because we're always like, we're in our little car and we're just like driving along. We're like looking over in that lane, looking over in that lane. Do we need to change lanes? You know what I mean? And it's like, when you just think like when you're in your lane, there's no traffic, this idea that it doesn't matter what other people are doing. It doesn't matter whether deals people are getting or success they're having. Like, you choose the pace of your lane, and you just have to look forward and keep chugging along in your lane, because when you're in your lane, there's no traffic.
I love that. I'm going to throw that up on my board today because
that's my go-to.
It's true. We can't help but always looking around what's going on, and are we staying up with competitors and whatnot. That's awesome. Stay in your lane. There's no traffic. I love it. Carly, it's been such a pleasure. You are such an inspiration and such a piece of optimism for the world of publishing and writing and creativity. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Claire.